I am here with PJ. PJ, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is PJ Cabrera, Dr. PJ Cabrera. I'm very proud of that new title. I am a lecturer of communication with the Department of Communication at UTSA. I am less than a year into the family. This is a dream come true just because I'm born and raised in San Antonio. I went to school in San Antonio. I'm born and raised on the west side, so it's one of those things where you see the lights and the end of the tunnel, but you never know that you're there. So you see that UTSA exists, but you never think that you're going to be working at UTSA. So I am incredibly blessed. I just completed my doctoral program in education. My dissertation focused on administrative use of prior review in high school journalism programs. I'm a journalism nerd. I did journalism in high school. I taught journalism for about right under 10 years. It is something that I'm passionate about, and knowing that the importance of it is not going away. The industry's changing, but there's no doubt that journalism is something that is a bedrock of our democracy, and it's something that we need to find super, super important. So I'm incredibly grateful to be here with you.
And we're grateful to have you. And you just finished your doctorate. So let's talk about the intersection of your doctorate and the work that you did for that with the stuff that you're going to actually be teaching now.
I am incredibly grateful that I spent 13 years in the classroom. 13 years in the classroom. So 12 years in the classroom, in the K-12 classroom. So I had the opportunity. So right when I left Texas State University, where I got my bachelor's in communication, I taught middle school for 2 years. After I taught middle school for 2 years, I came to San Antonio to teach high school journalism for about 9 years. In that time span, I also got my master's and I started my doctoral degree. They always say when you do your doctorate, what is something that you can talk about for 3 years? Something that's not going to get old to you, something that you find interesting. And for me, it was journalism. I did journalism all through high school. I fell in love with it. I did it in college. I taught it. So I wanted to make sure that I studied something that I can talk about for 10, 20, 30 years from now. And that's high school journalism. Journalism in general, student-free speech, student-free press, all of that stuff I find incredibly fascinating. So I did my study on the prior review on high school journalism programs. If you don't know, in Texas, well, there was a court case, the Hazelwood court case, that basically said if administrators can justify pulling content from high school journalism publications, they can't. They just have to justify it for however reason. It's actually called legitimate pedagogical interest. However, there is no standard for what that is. There's no definition for it. So a principal, if it's going to make the school board mad, can justify that that's legitimate pedagogical interest. Therefore, they will censor students. I just wanted to find out why. What is the reason as to why administrators will censor students? And that was the bedrock of my study. That the nerdiness of it is part one of why I wanted to get my doctoral degree. But the second half of it is in the high school journalism community. There are maybe 3 or 4 men of color in the entire country who are the faces of the discipline, I guess you want to say. It's a discipline that is heavy middle-aged white woman. And one of the reasons that I wanted to continue to study it and be loud about it is there's not a lot of this in high school journalism. And I wanted to make sure that there was more representation, not only in the discipline, but also in education in general. I think it's super important when students see somebody that looks like them at the front of the classroom. That's just half of the student's management right there. So those two things led me to just make sure that I finished, and I was excited that I finished.
Well, congratulations. One of our colleagues just had an academic freedom symposium, and I'm thinking this relates nicely because representation is under threat, at least in Texas. Because we've gotten rid of some of the programs that were previously designed to help with those sorts of things. So can you speak a little bit about why people should support programs that might encourage better, more diverse representation in journalism programs?
Jesus, where do I begin? The first 2 things that come to mind is diversity matters. Diversity matters. I don't know if there's anything that says that diversity is a bad thing that leads to the lessening of anything. Diversity leads to better education. It leads to a better life for people. It just leads to every good thing that can happen to us. So why stop it? It doesn't make sense to me. But also at the same time, we need people to lead that cause, whatever that is, meaning politically, educationally, socially, locally, like every aspect of society, we need people to lead, to be in the forefront of diversity matters. Diversity matters. So I have found that my place in that conversation is in education, but also specifically in journalism education. So that's part one. Part two, stories matter. If you don't have people telling the Latino story, whatever that is, especially in San Antonio, we're at some point going to lose that story. And storytelling is incredibly important for generations to kind of just understand the impact of the people before us. Those two things I think are incredibly important when we start talking about why is all this important? Why is all this work that we're doing right now important? It's just we need to make sure that there's more people of color in the front of the classroom and behind the classroom as well, doing the legwork.
Why might diverse voices be an important part of writing those kinds of stories? And what might they bring that maybe less diverse voices might not bring?
There's a perspective. I think right now, one of the big issues that we're having in just society as a whole is that we're just incredibly divided. I think that we just forgot to have conversations. We forgot to be open. There's always been a left and a right. The vast majority of people are in the center, but there's always been a left and the right. And that left is getting more and more left, and that right is getting more and more right. And in terms of media literacy and the news, we tend to see the extreme left and we tend to see the extreme right. And there's this sense that we have to be part of those camps. The vast majority of the people are in the middle. The vast majority of people are just wanting to wake up, go to work, take care of their families, the day-to-day. But the lack of conversation skills and the lack of conversation skills and the more divisiveness that we're in is just leading us just to not talk. So that's one. The lack of conversation is leading to I think the lack of understanding and empathy with each other. So the perfect example is this immigration issue that's going on right now. I think so many people are being so loud about it, and rightly so. We have a problem, but there's a lack of empathy going on and lack of conversation. Like, okay, let's find out the why here. We just see the problem, but let's find out, one, the why is this happening, and two, anybody who picks up their life and takes their kids from one side of the country to another, something's going on. That's a big deal. So let's just give them a little bit more empathy. Those conversations are not happening, and I think that's a big problem that we need to address. And I think that storytelling and getting to know each other a little bit better, understanding our neighbor, I think that's a big deal.
We're both at the University of Texas at San Antonio, which is a proud Hispanic serving institution. Maybe you can speak to the kind of unique value of the voices that would be a part of a journalism fabric that comes from a university like that maybe other journalism programs might not be able to focus on.
I am born and raised in San Antonio. I'm a proud Latino. My parents are Dominican. They immigrated here, had my older brother, and they had me, and we lived in an apartment on the west side of town that I want to say it's not. I want to say that it wasn't ideal, but it worked. It worked for us. I understand what it is to be poor. I understand what it is to be brown, and I understand what it is to already go into the education system with a chip on your shoulder. There are so many of our students, especially in a Hispanic serving institution, that share that sentiment, that understand what it means to be poor, what it means to be brown, what it means to be whatever. When you have somebody at the front of the classroom who looks like them and understands their journey, it makes the academic environment significantly times better, because there's conversations that I can have with my Latino students, my Afro-Latino students, that they'll just get it. They'll just get it. And it's hard to explain, and it's hard to kind of put into words. And they just get it. More and more of us at the front of the classroom allows for programs like ours, especially a communications program, to just flourish, because you have so many different perspectives, so many different voices. And because of that, you then bring in students with so many different perspectives and so many different voices. Therefore, you just have a garden of academia that is happening. That's my hope, to be a part of a team that does that. And I love the fact that UTSA is a proud Hispanic serving institution, because we're basically saying UTSA is the place to be if you want that diverse academia experience.
Being able to come from a place with authentic experience of experiencing your students' struggles not only helps you to relate to them better, but it can help to serve as an example of what they might become.
One of the reasons that I wanted to be doctor is to be that difference maker. I wanted to let people know that you could come from where I came from and still be successful. To address what you said earlier, my best friend is a white blonde-haired woman. And I am her daughter's godfather. We have had conversations about life and about society that I'm incredibly grateful that she's in a position where, one, she feels comfortable having those conversations, and two, that we can. That goes back to what I was talking about earlier. We have to get to a point where we can have open and honest, empathetic conversations. I love the fact that there are so many professors on our campus and in our department specifically who, no matter where they come from or what they look like, they're willing to have those conversations. That, I think, is incredibly important. They're open, they're empathetic, and you have all of these experiences from so many different directions, and that's powerful to me. And like you said earlier, that is not to say that a professor can't do that. Absolutely, I've seen it happen. We just need more of it. We need more of it, and it needs to be loud.
Being able to relate to our students in authentic ways, regardless of your background, is important. But there is a danger of a single story. If we don't have people who have diverse stories in our representative institutions, including the Fifth Estate, including journalism, then we will be impoverished to have only certain kinds of stories being told. Can you speak a little bit about that? Can you speak a little bit about the danger of not hearing stories that are from certain populations?
The question itself makes me sad, just because the thing that comes to my mind is a systematic lessening of those stories. I don't ever want to get to a point in our society, in my lifetime, I guess, that my community's stories are forgotten. And I want to be able to continue to tell those stories. At some point, the next generation tells those stories, and to make an impact and to make some sort of change. The biggest fear of not being able to tell those stories is having that history forgotten. That's why I'm kind of loud about my story. I want people to see what perseverance and determination looks like, and I want other people to be able to tell those stories as well. And I think that's what makes journalism so powerful. Not just to keep the establishment accountable, that's one aspect of it, but there's the storytelling aspect where there are so many stories to be told. Somebody has to tell them. And we need to teach students to tell those stories. That's why I think what makes journalism incredibly a powerful tool is it's allowing us to not forget history.
We have a lot of students who are pursuing majors in public relations, for example, or digital communication right now, who are pursuing that in part so they can be able to speak with journalists, to work with journalists, to become a journalist one day. The kind of media jobs that are available to students when they graduate with a communication degree are vast. So do you have any advice for those students on how to become the very best journalists they can be?
I think one of the biggest hurdles that we're in right now, which is not necessarily a bad hurdle, is the industry itself is changing. The consumer is changing, the industry is changing, the medium is changing. However, the newspaper organization is not changing. Frankly, it's growing. So there is a need for storytellers when you leave college. There is a need for people to create media that can be consumed by consumers. Right now, we're in the middle of just the industry changing. I think people get really, really, really scared when they see a journalism program or when they see a communications program. And like every student, which is understandable, once I have this degree, what am I going to do with it? What's the next step? I think it needs to be emphasized that journalism is not going anywhere. It's changing. You might not necessarily be the writer for the physical newspaper, but you may still be the writer for the San Antonio Express News, and that's going to go digital, and then it's going to be disseminated to a wider audience because that's just the way that digital works. I think it's up to us as instructors and leaders to cultivate a program that creates students that are ready for the industry. The issue, again, not an issue, is technology is changing so fast that we need to, and we as an academics, we need to get a handle as to, okay, what does the X, Y, and Z corporation need when our students graduate? Let's start prepping them for that. Let's get the resources to prep students for that. I think we're at a great place to do it. The issue is not UTSA. The issue is not the kid. The issue is not the instructor. The issue is the industry and technology is moving faster than humans can figure out how to deal with it. So what does it look? It's going to change next year. It's going to change 2 years from now. We just need to get a handle of where it's going to go.
The change accelerating, I think, is a really nice theme to hit on. I'm glad that you brought it up. I know that, for example, artificial intelligence has been just taking off lately in conversations about how journalism is done and conversations about what is the place of this new tool. We've seen staffs cut at major corporations, and one of the reasons cited, and this is early on, is AI. So maybe you can speak a little bit to how we should prepare students to deal with change.
I think the biggest thing that I have learned as an academic is to use it as a tool and not use it as a crutch. Therefore, there's a fundamental learning that needs to happen first before we even touch AI. And without that foundation, I mean, AI is a mute point. But I think that it's a little scary because it's changing the industry so fast and in a way that it's going to hurt people's bottom line and how people live their life. I hope that at some point we don't get to use it as a crutch, that the foundation and the fundamentals of journalism is still there. I am scared, but I think that the biggest overarching answer to that question is we need to learn to use it as a tool and not a crutch. It's the wild, wild west out there with AI, the wild, wild west. And some of the things that are being created are inventions that are so powerful, and yet some of the things that are being done with it are completely unethical and immoral, and one could say it's also illegal.
Regardless of the changes in technology, regardless of the changes of tools, we have certain principles of journalism, certain principles, for example, of news value. What makes a good story does not change because human beings change so slowly. And what human beings value, what we valued back then, is very similar to what we value now. So maybe you can speak a little bit about these timeless principles, like what makes a great news story for our public relations majors or our journalism majors who are working on stories.
So I think the perfect example is yesterday at the Grammys. Tracy Chapman performed, and that was the first time that she's kind of really been on stage in a long time. And the result of it was an increase in searches of Tracy Chapman and an increase in what's it called? Her song Fast Cars. What makes a great story, selfishly, is a story that causes people to be inquisitive. Yes, you have the news values. You have, is it timely? Does it involve some sort of conflict? Whatever. Is it proximity? You have all those news values. But if there's a great story out there that says, I want to know more, or I want to learn more, or tell me more about that, I think that makes a great story. That makes a fantastic story. I've always taught students that, like, when you do a story about a person, do the arc, do like the beginning, middle, and end kind of thing, but leave the reader wanting more. Really, they're telling more, like, or going to that person, I read that story about you. You are an amazing person. That led that one person to read the story, get up, find that person to tell them, I read this story about you, and that's a good thing. That was the more. So leave the reader wanting more or needing more, and I think that's what makes a great story.
Leave the reader wanting more is a great axiom for creating curiosity. What are some other things that we can do as journalists when we're writing stories and crafting stories to help hook our readers in, or help hook our listeners in if it's a podcast or a video? How can we help hook them to actually read the rest of the story?
Multi-pronged, just because the medium is going to change. So when I did teach journalism at the high school level, they had to take a journalism class first before they were even starting to produce any publications. one of the things that I always said is I do not want somebody on my staff who cannot write. The ability to write well is incredibly important, either as a journalist or even just in life. I think that it's an art. Writing is very much an art that I'm fearful that is being lost, but something that I don't think is going to be lost. Just because with the rise of AI and technology, there's no necessarily need to write well, quote unquote. But especially a journalist who is doing a story that is going to be written, the ability to write well, to get somebody hooked in the first 2 or 3 sentences, 4 sentences, maybe first 2 paragraphs is incredibly important. So that's on the written aspect of it. The audio aspect of it, the podcast aspect of it, I mean, you need somebody who can be a good storyteller, who can be animated, who can get into somebody's ear and keep somebody for an hour. That's difficult. While they're driving, like, oh, I listened to this great podcast today. That is a skill. That's not something that you can just go out and just talk. You have to be able to interview. You have to be able to guide an interview. You have to be a bit of an extrovert and have inflection in your voice. And there's an audio aspect to that I think is incredibly important. Now we have the writing aspect where you have to know how to write, the audio aspect where you have to know how to interview, and then you have your broadcasting aspect where you're having a face-to-face conversation with somebody that's being recorded. There's the personality aspect to it. You have to be able to be personable, not only with your audience, but also with the person who you're interviewing. And if you can't do that, then it's going to come off as that you're bored. Your face is going to say that you're not interested. So you have to be interested. So it's multi-pronged. I think it's going to be important as we develop this new journalist for this new generation of journalism, that we develop a multimedia journalist who's able to do a little bit of everything. That's going to be difficult because we're not going to just have writers anymore. The writer's going to have to be able to do writing and audio, or have to be able to do audio and video or whatever. So we have to develop that multimedia journalist who has all those skill sets that they can be a chameleon when they walk into a newsroom.
And we talk about the difference between writing for the eye versus writing for the ear versus writing for video, right?
Yeah.
The medium can help dictate the message. Maybe you can speak a little bit about Marshall McLuhan, his famous, the message is the medium axiom, right? But how does the channel affect your choices as a communicator as to how you might want to communicate differently? Because you just broke down, if I write an article, I'm worried about, can I write well? If I'm creating a podcast, I want to be sure I'm writing for the ear. If I'm working on video, I want to make sure that I'm interested and I'm enthusiastic. Can you speak about some universal truths of different platforms or channels?
In the school district, you have to create messages where your parents are at or where your students are at. That is changing just in the time when I was teaching. So when I first started teaching, the kids were on Instagram. That's where they're at. So you cultivate a message on Instagram for your audience, right? That's where the kids were at. The parents were still on Facebook. So as time has gone in the last 10 years, the parent is now on Instagram and the kids are now on TikTok. So you cultivate the message for the medium for your consumer. Now, to answer the question, things are changing so quickly. There's some fundamental things, meaning everybody probably still has the TV, but no, I don't remember. I don't remember the last time I listened to the radio. I don't. That medium is changing to podcasting. So depending on the medium and then depending on your consumer is how you craft the message. So if we're talking to our parents right now are Instagram parents. So we have to kind of guide our message to fit the platform of Instagram, and then also guide the message on Instagram. And then you have our students who are on TikTok. That itself is also changing because then you throw in politics. And politics just changes everything. And I think the last election has put a lot of emphasis on the role of journalism, not only in politics, but in consumption of news and consumption of information. So do our voters get all their information from Twitter? Do they get it from Instagram? Do they get it from TikTok? Do they get it from Facebook? Do they get it from newsletters? Do they get it on TV? Do they get it through podcasts? We have to cultivate a message for a consumer, but for the platform as well. That concept is hard to fully understand, But I also think that we have students who are so used to using it every day that they don't necessarily realize that they're themselves are cultivating those messages on those platforms, and they don't realize that they're actually doing it.
It's interesting you're talking about the differences in the platforms and how basically the kids run away from the parents, and the kids are always going to create and use their own thing, right?
Now, what's the next platform, whatever it is?
Yeah.
None of us probably know, because something's going to come around and it's going to be explosive, and then all of the masses are going to move to that platform, and then we're going to have to adjust again.
And adaptation is the name of the game, right? And not just journalism, not just public relations, not just speaking, right? We adapt to our audiences. I know that a lot of platforms are trying to move towards depoliticization, are getting politics out of the social media because it's just not good for business to have that kind of polarization. While other platforms might be embracing it because it gets more likes, views, and shares, right? If you can make someone feel something, they're going to engage with that piece of content. If people aren't able to get their news from social media, what does that do to our fifth estate? Does that make it stronger or weaker? What's your opinion on news and social media? Should it be in social media? Should it be removed from social media? What's your take here?
I think that it's important to understand that education is a business. It is also important to understand that journalism is also a business, and they have to probably tread a much thinner line than education does. We have to dance a thin line in education as a whole. UTSA is a university. The core purpose of it is to educate students. But at the same time, it is a business. There is a business aspect of running a university. Same thing like a news organization. The sole purpose of a news organization is to inform their viewers. At the same time, it is a business, and they have to be aware of the Google Analytics. They have to be aware of the insights. They have to be aware of all of those things on the back end to make sure that they're hitting their audience and they're hitting maybe, I don't know, a certain amount of likes and clicks or whatever. That is such a tricky line to dance, just because you don't want to forget the foundation of your purpose. You don't want to forget that you're a news organization and your job is to promote, inform your viewers, inform your readers. It's such a difficult dance. Man, I am worried that this upcoming election is going to make it worse, just because of how divisive that we are, and that we are, as educators, are not teaching media literacy the way that we're supposed to, so that we're going to get more and more divided. I will forever ring the bell of news organizations. They are the foundation of our country, and it's not going to go away. But there's a fear that I have that we're going to take it for granted, meaning there's no one going to be around to tell us unbiased, factual information, and we're just going to be listening to people who basically add fuel to the fire that we're already in. That's my biggest fear.
You talked about media literacy, and I know we teach it at the university level as a part of our courses. What do people need to know in order to be media literate? What are some of those key critical thinking skills that you would want your students to have in the back of their mind as they're being more critical consumers of news, not just creating news and writing stories that will get the attention they need, but as they're being consumers? Let's flip it around from the writers to the consumers of media.
I think the biggest thing is because we're so bombarded with information, where's your information coming from? That's number one, I think. And if I was teaching a media literacy class, that would be a good chunk of time. Let's study the organization where you're getting your information from, and is that information factual? There are so many people who are putting so much information online, and we easily share and retweet and whatever to each other, not necessarily knowing where that information is coming from. It looks good, it looks nice, and it looks professional, and it just can be a bunch of lies. And I think that's the biggest thing is do you know where your information is coming from? And we have to make sure that we not only validate those sources, but we also know how to do it.
So to flip that around, we are also teaching media influence, right? We have public relations students who want to make journalists' jobs easier, to help them to write the stories that take so much time to write. What can our public relations students do to make a reporter's job easier? Beyond, of course, the press release. What kind of things do they need to think about in terms of their story to make it newsworthy?
I think those fundamental skills of content creating, meaning, and that goes from writing that press release in a way that's gonna answer all the journalists' questions before they even have questions, or creating that video or creating those photos for journalists to or an organization to use. You're gonna have to kind of think ahead of the person who you're creating content for, and then also going back to what we were talking about earlier, not only think ahead, but also think ahead of where that content's going to be placed to make sure that that content is made for said platform. All those questions are it's difficult, and that's why people are hired to be PR people, is because you have to have that mindset to think ahead of the consumer or journalist, and then to be ahead of where that information is going to go or that content's going to go and what platform's going to go on. And I think that that's super, super, super important, just to be mindful of the time that we're in. We're in a time where you have to be that forward thinker all of the time.
Let's zoom back into storytelling for journalists specific. What advice do you have for journalists that want to tell stories that matter? They want to tell stories that maybe feature these diverse perspectives we've been talking about. They want to tell stories that might get picked up by other journalists to be spread even further from where it was originally intended. What's some tips for storytelling for journalists?
I think in order to be a good storyteller, you have to be a good interviewer. You have to be able to ask that question or those questions and then ask the next question and then ask the next question. You have to be a good interviewer, but you also have to be a good listener. And if your interviewee says something that like, oh, that's really interesting, grab that nugget and then start to dig in there. And then you still have, let's say you have questions. Let's say you walk into an interview with 5 questions. Let's hope not. But let's say you walk into an interview with 5 questions. You have to be a good interviewer. You have to get as much information as you can and dig deep into a story to the point where you have gotten everything that you need from that person. And at the same time, be a good listener. Be a good active listener, not a passive listener, an active listener, that you're listening to everything that person is saying, and then you can grab a nugget and then just keep on going to the next question.
I know that a lot of our students might be nervous for their first interviews. Can you maybe give some tips for presence, for making sure that we're paying attention to what the other person's saying? Because I know, for example, our podcasting students might struggle with this. Our journalist students might struggle with this. Our PR students might struggle with this idea of, I have to stick to a script. And I know we're not sticking to a script right now, so it's a good example. But do you think we have to have a script?
No, absolutely not. I think usually when I go into an interview, I usually have like bullet points of things that I want to talk about. From there, I usually just start with a conversation. Just like, hey, how are you? And just start to a natural conversation that eventually leads to me hitting those bullet points. That's just me. I'm also an extrovert, so it's a little easy for me just to go and I can talk to a brick wall kind of thing. A framework is good, but an informal interview is probably what's best, is that when you sit down and just talk to them. Make sure you, as the interviewer, if you need to make sure that you're skillful, make sure you have those bullet points, but just talk. And it sounds something so simple, but it's really difficult for people just to sit and talk and guide a conversation. That is skillful. It is incredibly skillful to do that not everybody can do. I think that that's going to be the most important thing, is to not only don't go in with a script, but just be able to talk. But at the same time, your nonverbals, position yourself the right way. Make sure you're looking them in the eye. Make sure that you're warm and inviting, because I think that I'm a huge person about energy. I think energy is palpable. And if you walk into a room and your interviewee is uncomfortable because you haven't created this vibe where they're allowed to be open and honest with you, then you're going to create a problem. And you're going to create a problem for yourself and for your content you're going to receive, but also they're not going to want to open up to you. You want to make sure that people open up to you.
And so our podcasters or public relations or journalists, whatever kind of stories they might be after, they get their interview, they're making them feel comfortable, they've done the things that you suggest to practice, and now they have a bunch of great answers. What makes the best answer to feature in a story that they're writing, or a video short that they're creating, or a reel they're creating, or whatever it is that they're creating? What makes an answer stand out as a part of a larger story?
So the first thing that came to my mind is restraint is the best possible thing. You have all of this stuff. You don't need to use everything. You don't need to use everything. Simple, especially for like a reel, especially for something that's digital, simple and clean is best. And especially if you're going to do a written piece, simple and clean is best. And you have all this plethora of information. You don't need to use it all, but just be able to have enough information to tell a really good story. But restraint is important, to pull back and not do it all, not do all the big fancy long things that you think are going to be cool and fancy. In reality, you're going to lose your audience. So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Create content for your consumer and a specific platform. So let's say, for example, Instagram. If you're creating a reel, how many times do we sit there and be like, after 10 seconds, we're done. After 5 seconds, we're done. So you have all this content and you created this fancy 120-second reel. You may not get your consumer to get all the way to the 100th second. So you have to create something that is good, concise, clean, to the point where you're going to have an interested viewer, to the point where they can view your entire thing. The written piece is a little different, because you want to create a good hook. You want to create a good lead that's going to get somebody to go down the entire way. So that inverted pyramid is incredibly important. So it just depends on which platform you're using and who your consumer is.
Coming back to it depends on the audience, I think is always a great thing to remind ourselves, and the platform and the channel too, as two really good things to keep in mind as we communicate. What is one skill that we haven't talked about that you think that students don't pay enough attention to?
I think social media has been one of those great inventions of life, right? But I think it also has given people the ability to only post the great things about their life. You don't go on social media to see the negative things that people are doing, and you also don't post the negative things that go on in your life. Sometimes we leave college thinking that it all is going to happen a month after college. You're going to have the perfect job. You're going to have perfect pay. Everything's going to be great. There's a level of perseverance, especially in journalism, that we need to remind our students that's going to happen, meaning the internships, meaning the moving, meaning the learning to live within your means. That, I think, is going to be the most important thing that I want students to know. Even if you're going to go not work in journalism, you're going to work in a communications job, or you're going to move cross-country, do whatever, right? Do whatever. Life may not happen a month after graduation in the way that you may think that it's going to be. Life will happen, and it may be bad, and that's okay. I think life, the biggest thing about especially journalism, and especially our careers, is you have to kind of push through, and you have to kind of understand that it's not going to be rainbows and sunshine after you graduate from college. I remember moving myself from San Antonio up to San Marcos and living in Texas at Texas State. And I remember my car had, like, the light was off and the passenger handle, like, you couldn't open it the right way. Like, it was just like, I'm surprised that car lasted the way that it did. It was a Toyota Corolla, and those last forever. And at that point, I would have never thought in my wildest dream that I'd be a doctor of education working at UTSA. And sometimes we don't. We have those goals, we have those long-term goals, and we want to achieve them, and we should achieve them. But there needs to be an understanding that in order to get to point B, and you're at point A right now, you might have to swivel a lot. And I think that makes for a really good story at some point. That journey from point A to point B, the ups and the downs and the uglies and the cries and the tears and the heartbreaks. Once you get to point B, God, it makes for a really good story. It makes for a fantastic story. So just be open to realizing that life's going to be a journey. And once you get to that ideal job, then you can celebrate at point B. But until then, it might be a journey. And I think as faculty members, I think it's important for us to also share our stories with students, because from when we graduated from college to our roles at the university, it wasn't easy. Like, it wasn't easy at all. But I think it's important to share those stories with our students.
What can students do now to help build their resume, to build their credibility, to make sure that they're prepared for that step after they graduate and they're looking for that first job, or maybe even creating their own company and being an entrepreneur to say, I'm going to create my own first job?
Specifically in our discipline, portfolios. Gather your work, gather multiple of your things, and especially make like either a drive or something. And when you're ready to go to that job interview, say, I'm ready for it. And here's proof of my work. Here's what I can do. I think that's the biggest thing. And even now, I love my job. I love what I do. But every single time I do something great, I put it in a portfolio and I keep it. And I constantly develop that portfolio and update that portfolio, because God forbid, at HEB and someone sparks a conversation with me, that conversation may lead to something, and someone who needs to see your work. Now, I'm not saying that's going to come. That's going to happen to everybody. That's not what I'm saying. But you have to be ready to collect your work and show it to people.
Be prepared to share and show your work. In my head, I have certain things that I'm looking for in public relations plans. For example, I'm looking for phasing. I'm looking to make sure that we have good alignment between objectives and execution. I'm trying to make sure that things add up. What are some things that you look for journalists who might be going out and trying to show their work for a job? What makes a good portfolio for a journalist?
Me specifically, can you write? Do you have the ability to write well? That's my biggest number one. My biggest number two is empathy and grit, meaning, can you go out and get the story, and then can you interview? That's number 1 and 2 for me. I think especially in our discipline, writing is incredibly important. And if you're able to write for multiple platforms and multiple aspects, I mean, that's even 10 times better, because academic writing is not journalistic writing. And I think the ability to go out and get the story. There's so many stories that are out there, and you have to talk to somebody and ask those questions and then get to where you need to get to. Those two things are big.
And if you don't have as much time and you're going through a bunch of portfolios, what are some of the key specific things that are indicators of great writing? You're just scanning that lead. You're just scanning that conclusion. What are you looking for? Get more specific than great writing for our students.
The skeletons, the periods, the exclamation marks, the commas, the punctuation, or the skeletons of Associated Press writing. If I'm scanning something, are you using the right there, and there? Is your grammar well done? That's, if you're winning the nitty gritty of it all, is your piece written in Associated Press style. If I have 10 pieces right in front of me from 10 different students, and I'm scanning every single one of them, I'm looking for AP style and grammatical errors. The ones that are not AP style, the ones that are filled with grammatical errors, I'm going to put it to the side, and I'm going to read the 3. Of those, are they following the inverted pyramid? Are they starting with the most important thing at the top and then going down? Those are the things that I would look for.
What is the inverted pyramid, and what makes it such an art and a science?
So in terms of storytelling, the inverted pyramid is starting with the most important thing or the most important topic, then going to the least important thing. Like, you're needing to get your readers hooked into a story or into a news article or whatever in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs or so. And then from there, go to the least important thing. The art of doing that in terms of writing, it's difficult. It's not easy. It's important for our journalists to understand that that's kind of how most articles are written, from the most important thing to the least important.
Is there anything else that you want to share with our students before I ask you where people can find you online?
I think one of now that I am bored, because I've finished my degree and I'm working at a dream institution and I need something else to do, kind of thing. I think about where I came from and what I'm going to do next. I think about all the goals that I have in life, and frankly, all the goals that I have at UTSA. And one of the things that I never want to forget is where I come from. Everyone has a story. All of us have a story to tell, and to not forget that story, and to not forget that you want to get to point B, but you need to start somewhere. And I always want to be an example for people that you can get to point B. It's just going to take some time, and it's going to take some work, and it's going to take some tears, but you can get to point B. And I want to be the personification of that. Did I do it perfectly? Absolutely not. Am I the best person on earth? Nowhere far from it. But I think I'm a good example for our students, especially for our Latino students, that you can get to point B. It is possible, and that everybody has a story, and my story is pretty awesome, and it's probably closer to yours than you probably think.
Where can people find you online?
So I have a LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is linkedin.com/PJ Cabrera, and then my faculty portfolio in the Department of Communications. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. I wear a lot of hats at UTSA and outside of UTSA. So emailing me is the best way to get a hold of me. All my emails come to my phone, UTSA. One of the things that I love doing is just talking to students and sharing stories with students and being the outlet for students because, again, we're more alike than we are different.
I love that. And just for our listeners, it's pedro.cabrera@utsa.edu. And you would love to field questions about what it takes to get from point A to point B and to really share your story with those students.
Send them all my way, and we can chat via email, and we can chat, have a Zoom. I would love that.
Thank you, PJ, so much for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your insights and your enthusiasm. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.